we work with food and ag innovation companies all over the world, in the Europe and the US, obviously in Israel. We have a subsidiary called Food Impact Israel. And I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you know that Israel is an innovative country, startup nation, has the entrepreneurial spirit. But I think what not many people know is Israel is actually quite small. It's the size of Delaware. About two-thirds of the country is desert. And there's not much water. So there's just really not that much resources for a pretty big population. So for the last 80 years, basically, Israel has been innovating on how it feeds its population. Israel invented drip irrigation in the north of Israel. It reuses almost 90% of its wastewater for agriculture, which is the most of any country in the world. It didn't invent desalination, but it contributed to major developments in desalination, essentially solving the water crisis in Israel using salt water and converting salt water to fresh water. It has a lot of developments in precision agriculture. It's a major hub for alternative protein companies. So if you think about protein, most of the protein that we consume today is from animal sources. And animal protein requires a lot of land. And the amount of natural resources on Earth, in Israel especially, are finite and they're limited. Animals take a lot of land because it's not just the cow's space that it needs to live, but it's all of the food that you need to grow for the cow, for raising the cow, for breeding the cow over its lifespan. So that ends up being a lot of arable land and a lot of water. And there's also an efficiency loss when you convert a plant protein into animal protein, because protein goes to do other things like create a brain and bones and skin and other things that we don't eat. So animal protein is pretty inefficient. And the kind of focus in Israel on innovation and innovative technologies and just the awareness of our limited amount of land has kind of contributed to Israel becoming basically a hub for alternative protein. Israel is number one in terms of number of companies per capita in alternative protein. And that includes plant-based meat alternatives, plant-based proteins, cultivated meat, precision fermentation, fermentation-based protein. So if you think about just like cattle versus fungi-based protein, cattle requires about 200 square miles for 1 kilo of edible protein, and fungi is less than one. So 200 times more. With cultivated meat, you need 1 cow, and then you only need it for 10 minutes. You swab it, and then it can keep going, and it can roam in the field and do whatever it wants. And then you take those cells, and then that's it. You have the DNA, and you can work with that. You can create theoretically cultivated meat for the entire planet. It's essentially a swab from any animal, any meat. It doesn't hurt the animal. And then from that, using bioreactors and different scientific methods, you can grow an immense amount of meat. Of course, there's a lot of processes behind it and a lot of selection, but that's in the nutshell. We're probably far from ending hunger, unfortunately, but there is a reality that the amount of natural resources on the planet are finite. And if we're going to grow in population as we've been growing as humans, estimated to be 10 billion people by 2050, there just isn't enough land and fresh water to feed people in the same way that they've been eating to date. So that's going to have to change. We're going to have to innovate on how food is made. Right now, cultivated meat is pretty expensive to make it. So most of the innovations are focused on how can we create this at scale at a cost that makes sense so that, eventually we could solve hunger, but it's far out. It tastes identical to meat. It is meat. It's just grown in a different way. It's not like eating an Impossible Burger or Beyond or like the plant-based burgers that they're trying to mimic meat. And some people say that they taste better. Some people say that they don't taste the same. That's a matter of opinion, but it is actually not meat. If that makes sense. But cultivated meat is just meat.